What if I told you that every time you use your windshield wipers in a light drizzle, you're experiencing the aftermath of one of the most brutal corporate betrayals in American history? A story where a simple blink of inspiration led to a billion-dollar war that destroyed a man's life, but also changed patent law forever. This isn't just another David versus Goliath tale. This is a story about how the most mundane invention you can imagine, something as simple as making windshield wipers pause, became the center of a legal battle that would consume an entire life, reshape American patent law, and reveal the dark underbelly of corporate America in the 1960s and 70s. This is the story of Robert Kearns, and trust me, you've never heard a David versus Goliath tale quite like this one. Picture this. It's 1952, wedding night. Robert Kearns is driving through a light rain with his new bride, probably still buzzing from champagne and the joy of the day. But something's bothering him. The windshield wipers are driving him crazy. Swipe, 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 swipe. This constant frantic scraping when what he really needs is just an occasional blink. And right there, in that moment of mild annoyance, Robert had what might be the most expensive aha moment in automotive history. He thought, why don't wipers work like the human eye? They should blink. Now, most of us would have that thought and moved on. But Robert Kearns wasn't most of us. He was an engineer with a PhD from Case Western Reserve University, and he had something that would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. He couldn't let things go. So Kearns went to his basement workshop and started tinkering. This wasn't just daydreaming. He engineered a working electromechanical device using a variable resistor to create a reliable, adjustable delay between wiper sweeps. Think about that for a second. In 1964, when he received U.S. patent 3,351,836 for his windshield wiper system with intermittent operation, this was revolutionary technology. Cars didn't have computers. This was pure mechanical genius. The beauty of Kearns' invention lay in its elegant simplicity. While other engineers were trying to solve the intermittent wiper problem with complex hydraulic systems that cost hundreds of dollars, Kearns created a solution using basic electronic components that could be manufactured for just a few dollars per unit. His system used a capacitor and resistor circuit that drivers could adjust to control wiper delays. It was the kind of breakthrough that makes you wonder why no one had thought of it before. Naturally, Kearns did what any inventor would do. He took his creation to Detroit. In 1963, he demonstrated his working prototype to Ford Motor Company. And here's where the story gets interesting. The Ford engineers were impressed, really impressed. For years, they've been struggling with this exact problem, trying to solve it with complex, expensive hydraulic systems. Kearns' solution was elegant, simple, and cheap. According to Kearns, Ford told him they were interested. They entered what he believed was a confidential relationship. They asked for more details about his patent, requested modifications, wanted to understand how it worked. Kearns, trusting and excited about a potential partnership, shared everything. The intimate technical details, the exact specifications, the heart of his invention. He thought he was building a business relationship. He had no idea he was being studied like a specimen. What Kearns didn't know was that this was standard operating procedure for Detroit's big three automakers in the 1960s. Corporate America had a well-established playbook. Engage small inventors in lengthy discussions under the guise of partnership, extract every technical detail, then develop your own independent version just different enough to avoid obvious patent infringement. It was a calculated strategy that relied on most individual inventors being unable to afford the massive legal costs required to fight billion-dollar corporations. Then came 1969. Ford introduced its own intermittent wiper system on the Mercury line. Not a partnership with Kearns, not a licensing deal, their own system. And it gets worse. Chrysler, General Motors, and other automakers quickly followed suit. Kearns looked at these new systems and was convinced they were using his core design. The concept of using a capacitor to control timing, that was the heart of his patent. And in his mind, they had stolen it. Now here's where Robert Kearns made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He could have walked away. He could have taken this as a hard lesson about corporate America and moved on. Instead, in 1978, he decided to represent himself and filed a monumental lawsuit against Ford Motor Company, and then Chrysler, and then other automakers. One man against the entire automotive industry. The automaker's defense was predictable but brutal. First, they argued his invention was obvious, that anyone could have thought of intermittent wipers. Sure, there were prior patents for wiper delays, but none as simple, reliable, or commercially viable as Kearns. Second, they claimed their solid-state electronic systems were fundamentally different from his electromechanical device, even though they performed the identical function. And here's where this story becomes both tragic and remarkable. The legal battles consumed Kearns completely. The stress contributed to the breakdown of his marriage. His family believed the obsession led to a mental breakdown that briefly landed him in an institution. He filled his house with legal documents, turned his life into a one-man war against billion-dollar corporations. He became Captain Ahab, and the automotive industry was his white whale. His wife Phyllis later described what it was like living with a man possessed. Their dining room table disappeared under stacks of patent documents and legal briefs. Family conversations were dominated by talk of motions, depositions, and court dates. His 6 children watched their father transform from an accomplished engineer into someone they barely recognized. The intermittent wiper system had given millions of drivers convenience and safety. For the Kearns family, it had become a curse that stole their husband and father. But then, something extraordinary happened. In 1990, the Ford case finally went to trial. Picture this courtroom scene. Robert Kearns, the engineer turned lawyer, cross-examining Ford's experts and presenting his own case with technical precision and passionate conviction. And the jury, they agreed with him. They found that Ford had indeed infringed on his patent. The award? $10.2 million. The trial itself was a masterclass in David versus Goliath legal strategy. Ford arrived with a team of high-powered corporate attorneys. Kearns, representing himself, came armed with technical drawings, patent documentation, and years of self-taught legal expertise. What surprised everyone was how effective he was in court, explaining complex technical concepts in simple terms and cross-examining Ford's witnesses with the authority of someone who had actually invented the technology they were discussing. Now, $10.2 million sounds like victory, but it was far from the hundreds of millions Kearns believed he was owed, and the jury found the infringement wasn't willful and deliberate, which significantly reduced potential damages. Still, emboldened by this partial victory, Kearns continued his fight against Chrysler. That case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and when the court refused to hear it, a lower court's verdict stood. In 1992, he won a staggering $30 million from Chrysler. So Robert Kearns won, right? He got his money, proved his point, showed that the little guy could take on Detroit and win. But here's the thing about Pyrrhic victories. They're called that for a reason. By the time the legal battles ended, Kearns had won nearly $30 million total. But the legal fees had eaten a significant portion of those awards. More devastating, the fight had consumed over 2 decades of his life, shattered his health, and fractured his family. He never achieved that industry-wide licensing deal that would have made him a billionaire. Meanwhile, his invention generated billions in value for the global auto industry. Robert Kearns died in 2005, remembered as both a tenacious defender of inventors' rights and a cautionary tale about the perils of obsession. His story was immortalized in the 2008 film Flash of Genius, starring Greg Kinnear. But here's what makes this more than just a tragic tale of corporate greed. Kearns' case became a landmark in patent law, establishing the doctrine of equivalence. The principle that you can infringe on a patent even if your copy isn't an exact replica, as long as it performs the same function in substantially the same way to achieve the same result. Every inventor since has benefited from Robert Kearns' stubborn, costly, life-consuming fight for justice. Before Kearns, corporations could circumvent patents by making minor technical modifications to patented inventions. Kearns' victory established that patent protection extends beyond exact specifications to cover the fundamental concept and function of an invention. This legal precedent has protected countless inventors from having their innovations stolen by larger competitors. Law schools now teach Kearns versus Chrysler as a foundational case in intellectual property law. So the next time you're driving in a light drizzle and your wipers give that patient rhythmic blink instead of a frantic scrape, remember Robert Kearns, A man who saw something that should have existed but didn't, created it, and then paid the ultimate price to prove it was his. The question is, was justice worth the cost of everything else he lost? It makes you wonder what other incredible tales are hiding just beneath the surface of history, doesn't it? If you want to uncover more stories like this, make sure to follow or subscribe to Untold Stories right where you're listening. And if you have a story you think the world needs to hear, share it with me in the comments or reviews. Your suggestion might be our next episode.